Hi, I'm Steelfur of Steelfur Speaks. I'm typically a flesh and blood content creator, but I do also cover other games as it pertains to broader industry TCG news. So this is a video about primarily Magic the Gathering, but also talking about how this trend might soon extend into other TCGs. I do videos on the regular about TCGs markets, but I am occasionally trying to expand my coverage into other games a bit more often, just to bring a bit of diversity to the channel, as what affects one game affects other games in general as well. So let's dive into the topic of Universes Beyond. For those not in the know, which will be people who are slightly outside the Magic community and ecosystem, maybe my flesh and blood fans, but I doubt many actual TCG aficionados are not aware of Universes Beyond. But essentially it is the expansion of Magic the Gathering beyond its traditional IP universes. That would be Dominaria, Kaladesh, all of those rich universes that Magic has created by itself, to include pop culture. Things like Assassin's Creed, things like Doctor Who, but also things like SpongeBob SquarePants, Warhammer 40,000, Walking Dead, Warhammer, and Lord of the Rings. And initially, it's important to understand that Universes Beyond was pitched to the Magic player base as only expanding into these things that were called MTG adjacent universes. So by that, it means something else that matched one of the other universes in the MTG meta. So, Lord of the Rings is a good example of this, because moving into Tolkien with its high fantasy and its wizards and its orcs is kind of a good pivot for Magic the Gathering, which has always had wizards and orcs and those kind of things. But it was very quick after this, original statement that things like Walking Dead and stuff like that started to roll out, as well as broadening those things out even further. Doctor Who, Assassin's Creed, and now moving on into realms like SpongeBob. There was even a My Little Pony secret lair as well. So quickly we've gone from MTG adjacent, aka something that seems like it would fit within the Magic the Gathering universe, even if it isn't from the Magic the Gathering universe, into anything really is welcome within Universes Beyond. And we're seeing upcoming Marvel, SpongeBob SquarePants, etc. Set for 2025. So that's one thing that has changed, is the broadening out from the initial pitch of Universes Beyond to a broader scope. And also the scope of what is being sold as Universes Beyond has increased as well. So originally it was just secret lairs, these special edition versions of existing cards or previews of existing cards, or cards that would be printed in main sets slightly later, and now it has expanded into full Universes Beyond booster sets with full printings of cards and commander decks, etc., etc. So we've gone from limited Universes Beyond products to expansive full product set releases within the Universes Beyond ecosystem. And again, Lord of the Rings was one of the first ones of those, but it will not be the last. And while in my own opinion, Lord of the Rings feels quite Magic the Gathering, I don't think Marvel does. So when that comes around, I'm going to be finding it a bit weird playing with those cards. But let's not get into my bias yet. We're again just talking about what this consists of. And actually, let's talk about whether or not it's good for Magic the Gathering before I put my own personal spin on it. And you can see their upcoming content schedule. So Aether Drift, Tarkir, and I think UUB and Edge of Eternities are all Magic the Gathering sets, and Final Fantasy and Spider-Man are not. So you've got two Universes Beyond sets in there, and then some TBA stuff coming out next year as well. But you can kind of see where they're going into Marvel, into Final Fantasy, to attract people who are fans of those universes into the Magic the Gathering game. So why is it good for Magic the Gathering? Let's be honest, game growth could be an angle. So there's a lot of dialogue about how Magic the Gathering's player base is not stagnant, but not growing in the way that the company would like. And this does create an opportunity to bring in new players from non-traditional sources. A lot of people who are invested in these Universes Beyond environments will be invested in certain characters, like, for example, Spider-Man from watching the new films. They will go wherever that Spider-Man character is, and that will bring them to Magic the Gathering. if Magic the Gathering puts those out there. And it's also just worth noting that like Magic the Gathering is competing with these flashy mobile games. Specifically, you're thinking about Marvel Snap in this case, which has proven very, very popular based on Marvel IP and brings that card game light experience to mobile. And Magic the Gathering has not been able to compete with that because it did not offer the appeal of the Marvel characters. But by bringing in Spider-Man, and we've already seen Captain America and Storm and other Marvel characters in the works as well, they actually start to compete with the success of games like Marvel Snap via Arena a bit more strongly, because they can offer a very good card game experience while also offering a Marvel experience and appealing to that. It is also worth noting that like this could also force the player base to become more diverse. Now, I know that the Commander ecospheres do have a lot of diverse play groups, and there are, certainly outside the competitive sphere of Magic, there is a lot more diversity than is represented by the, mass attendees at large tournaments, as is a problem with all trading card games. But there are additional archetypes that will be explored through the addition of Final Fantasy, Spider-Man, and Marvel in general, and also other areas. And also, you just have to be honest about like the environment that we're currently in. The games that are doing well are doing collaboration with other games, Fortnite, etc. There is a large volume of these cross collaborations that harness the interest in one game and bring it into another game. And Magic itself is a very, very flexible system, so it can handle lots of these different ideas while still maintaining a solid gameplay approach. And the other reason, of course, that they might be, this might be good for MTG is that, unfortunately, a lot of the traditional archetypes, what makes a mage, what makes a lightning dinosaur, though that's a bit more tongue-in-cheek, have been explored in the last 25 years of Magic the Gathering. So that is why you do see a lot more diversity into things like Aether Drift, which I think is a speed racing focused set, into stuff like Neon Kamigawa, and this, the presence of additional universes. Final Fantasy does provide a rich environment for creation because you have an existing archetype which is popular with a group of fans, so you're not taking a risk, but then you can turn around and ask the question, what colors would Spider-Man be? How do we represent the different types of Spider-Man as a card design? What does Venom Spider-Man do that's different from regular Spider-Man? What does the Superior Spider-Man, you see I'm flexing my comic book knowledge, do that's different from the Amazing Spider-Man? Do we have Cosmic Spider-Man coming in, and how does he compare? Is he a big blue-red character that costs 5 mana and does something amazing with instants, because to reflect his cosmic power? So, there are these different concepts that come fully formed that give the design team something to work on and can lead to some design freshness rather than starting with a blank slate. Now, I will say those blank slates recently have been somewhat effective. Bloomburrow was seen as a very good breath of fresh air. People have wanted a red wall, what's the word for it, anamorphic set for a long time, and it seemed like it went down really well. I think the only regret I heard from people was that it was come and gone too quickly. It was a set that came in, there wasn't a follow-up set or a bigger story arc, it was just one-off done, and then we went into, what are we on now, to horror and things like that. I think we're on to horror and 80s or 70s horror TV shows, right, with the latest set in... not Tarkir, it's... you see, this is where my recent knowledge of Magic starts to fall down. I apologise. But you get my point. So we're now in horror, and then we're going to go into speed racing, and then we're going to go into universes beyond. So we've got a lot of different ideas, and some of them are hitting and some of them are not. This does kind of give a fresh source of ideas based on existing IP that designers can lean on to bring some freshness as they try and capture the idea of how X-Men play or how Spider-Man plays in the game, which could be a good thing, right? But why could it be a bad thing? Now, everyone who follows Magic has probably seen the webcomic on the right, which was done years ago when Universes Beyond first started getting hinted at. And, it kind of has two people playing with all of these different characters from Marvel and Star Wars and SpongeBob. And someone's like, well, what are you playing? And someone's like, it's Magic the Gathering. How can you not recognize it? And a lot of people kind of, resonated with that feeling. And I think the biggest existential threat to Magic the Gathering is alienation of large amounts of the existing player base. Now, will that happen? That's very, very hard to say, because you've got to look at things from two perspectives. The first thing is a lot of people are at this stage already not spending a lot of money on Magic the Gathering. They have commander decks established. They buy a couple of cards when a new set comes out for those existing commander decks. Sometimes they build a new commander deck. It's very well understood that the majority of people playing Magic are playing kitchen table. They are playing commander. They are not playing competitive standard. So the fact is that there's a group of people who already have product fatigue. They already have a lack of coherent, they already have product fatigue, and they're already not buying a lot of cards. So when I say you might alienate them, you could, but they're very ingrained. So they're already not your target market. But there are a lot of those people who are still involved in regularly buying cards, regularly involved in reviewing their decks, building new decks. And they are some people who will suffer from a lack of coherent game feel. And I think that's what this webcomic really represents, is it's not the fact that things get ridiculous when you add Kylo Ren and SpongeBob, because it's very likely that those people are going to have very well designed abilities. They're going to be quite interesting. They're going to be well rounded. Really, the problem is when I look at the game on the table and these cards are interacting, does it feel like Magic the Gathering? Does it feel like a cohesive experience versus something becoming a mishmash? It just becoming like confusing and complicated in a way that is, sensorily problematic. Because one of the things that I would say, and certainly as a Flesh and Blood player now, and somebody who played Legend of the Five Rings before that, and I know I'm not in the mainstream, is that on the board narrative does actually matter for my enjoyment of the game. And when I play Magic the Gathering and I'm playing, my green deck, I have a mono green colorless, abilityless creature deck, where I have loads of things based on that Professor Druid, and I have a Prosper deck. When I'm playing those decks, I like the feeling of coherency within what's going on in the deck. So it's not just Prosper and he's playing out, Sauron or something, and that kind of feels a bit weird. It is, my green deck is summoning big green creatures and smacking people in the face. So there is an onboard coherency and kind of like a non-stated narrative that I feel resonates with a lot of people, where you can get jarred out of that feeling of your narrative. And that leads people to a feeling that it's not really their Magic the Gathering anymore, because the Magic the Gathering that they've known for 20 plus years, or even 5 or 10 plus years, has been one where, although the ideas were different from set to set, there was a level of inherent coherence between the different ideas, between the different sets, between the different types of characters that you would see in Magic the Gathering. And now we have a drastic departure. And the problem as well is that it's not a drastic departure to a new plane or Magic the Gathering doing something simple with a character that doesn't have any existing baggage or weight behind it. It is a character like Spider-Man with a huge amount of weight behind it, which increases that jarring experience inherent in that thing. And that can lead to drastic feelings of alienation, which is, I think, the biggest worry. So the biggest concern would be if a large number of players said this was the final straw, and keeping in mind there has been a level of dissatisfaction with MTG over the past few years due to their increased range of product releases and their increased issues with balance and their cutting of lore and, all of these things that have happened recently. Now, obviously, on the other side of things, we know that there has to be a large, actual piece of consumer-based evidence that dictates that this is a good trend. We've heard from various MTG market people like Alpha Investments that Universes Beyond sells like hotcakes. So, there is obviously the other side of this where there are a lot of people buying these ideas. But that does lead us to the question, is this going to be bad for business? Do those new players that buy into the set stay around and help add to the MTG community? Do they actually come and play the game for a consistent period of time? If they do, then fantastic. And you've just gained a new player base and they're coming in and they're joining the community and they're having a good time. And you shouldn't be critical of people who got into the game through Universes Beyond, right? Because the core thing that makes Magic a fun game is the color system and the lands. So if people are getting into the game and using Spider-Man as their jump point in, then that's great. But on the other side of things, if they come in and they think Spider-Man's great, but then the next set isn't Spider-Man, it's Dragons of Tarkir, and they're like, I don't really like dragons, they could bounce off the game pretty quickly as well. So there's real question in the long run as to whether these players are going to be transient, and of course whether the amount that's coming in there is offset by the number of people who are leaving, and if they don't stick around, we don't want to get into a situation, because now this is a thing where Magic wants to sell boosters. If they're selling a lot of boosters, do they care what's happening to the game in your local area? Probably a bit, but the point is that like if the community doesn't stay around and remain present, then that does lead to a slow decline, no matter how many people are buying the product. And I think someone said this to me quite interestingly in a local game store last week, is that he felt that Magic the Gathering was moving more towards a collectible that needed a game to be built around. And that was a weird statement for me to hear. I kind of got what he meant, but it was a weird statement for me to hear. So, I mean, I'll leave you guys to think whether you think that's true. I personally don't think we've got that far. I think the game is still the core of what makes Magic special, but I can understand why some people might feel that is where we're going to after this. And I also do feel like one of the main risks to this is a dilution of what makes Magic the Gathering special. The fact is, and recently we have seen massive multi-million-dollar projects fail because of this. People investing in non-original ideas, not doing them well or with a good enough quality, making quick money, and then annoying and irritating their main customer base as a result. Now, we're thinking about Rings of Power, we're thinking about the last season of Game of Thrones, we're thinking about Star Wars, we're thinking about very, very large budget adaptations of very serious and well-liked intellectual property that failed to deliver on the promise of what they could offer because they weren't done and executed well, and also because the ideas weren't exciting and new. And I think one of the things that made a lot of people excited about Magic the Gathering for the last 25 years that we have to acknowledge is the creation of unique settings, planes, characters, environments, art, and things that were original and couldn't be thought up by anyone else, and they were invested in because of those originality, which captured people's imaginations and created characters and environments that they wanted to see again, right? So it's not like, people care about Dominiaria and Kaladesh and Mirrodin, and Phyrexia. It's not, those settings aren't worthless, but they wouldn't have been created in a game that played only with the universes beyond. Now, the flip side of this is that if they have this aggressive content release schedule and they're feeling under pressure to make these unique universes, having 50% of what comes out be a universes beyond product does actually free up the design teams, bandwidth to create more new ideas and actually make them more rounded and more invested. What you hope doesn't happen, what may have already happened, I don't really know, is that the design team gets laid off because they have 50% less work to do and they don't put more time and investment into making original ideas. They just make what they have been doing, which is hit and a miss a lot of the time, and that. But it's also just like, these things have been used up. They have been spent. There have been multiple Marvel card games, thinking Versus Systems, Marvel Champions. I have played Marvel card games for years and they've been all right, but I've played through the fantasy of playing Spider-Man on the table. I've played the Final Fantasy card game and I've played card games in Final Fantasy games. Like, these ideas are already squeezed for a certain amount of what they're worth, and just bringing them to Magic the Gathering doesn't make me more excited for them. Now, but I like Spider-Man, for the record. Like, I've watched all the Spider-Man films, I've read most of the Spider-Man comics. That's a gross overstatement, there's so many, but I've read quite a few Spider-Man comics and stuff like Civil War, where Spider-Man was a really big character. So, I have a love for Spider-Man. I'm not that excited to see him in Magic the Gathering because I've played Spider-Man in Marvel Champions and I played Spider-Man Spider-Friends in Versus Systems when it first came out. My Spider-Man playing in card games has kind of been done. So, and not everyone's going to be like me, but I'm just saying that when you're using this already used up content, there is a bit of fatigue with it already. So, why are they doing Universes Beyond? Let's just be blatantly honest here. Money is the reason. right? Wizards has a growth goal for their shareholders and their investors. They have a growth that they have to do. And you have this wonderful chart on the right, which shows the number of releases that Wizards have done per year. And you can see in 2022, 48 plus, 2021, 46, and just a drastic doubling. Now, not all of those are full-fledged sets, but the fact is they are putting out more and more and more every year. And it's a lot to keep up with, but they're doing this because they want to sell more money. They want more potential customers. They want more product units. They want to sell, and they want the tie-ins to generate revenue. They also want to save money on design costs and on setting development. The fact is that building a unique plane or world that feels rich, that feels unique, and then designing and drawing all the art for it and writing story costs money, it costs time, and you can miss. Like, you can make a plane that no one likes, you can miss on lore and writing, and you also don't have to pay as much on art direction because there are existing art for these characters you can reuse. You can just say, look, I want Spider-Man in a dramatic pose wearing his classic suit, and the artist can go and draw that because there's lots of existing Spider-Man artists, right? You don't have to spend as much time on art direction. And the second thing, which I didn't think about, but then I read a big post from an artist on Facebook who I think he drew Shivan Dragon and some other stuff. I didn't catch his name because it was like reshared a few times. And he basically laid out how his revenue from Wizards of the Coast had happened over the last 20 years. Now, I don't know the truth of the numbers behind this, but I do understand the truth of what he's saying after the fact. And he's saying that Wizards of the Coast paid him $1,000 per piece of card art in 1997, not 86, and then he also got paid $1,000 in 2021. And then in 2024, he said they put it up to $1,250. But he said that the only reason he kept working for Magic the Gathering was A, he wanted the prestige of making a Magic the Gathering card, and B, he could sell the prints, he could sell playmats, he could go to conventions and get signed cards and charge for signings and do all of that aftermarket stuff to make money. And he said that what's actually happened, which is quite interesting, is that because all of these universes beyond IPs belong to someone else, there's now a provision in the contract that A, the art must be digital, and B, the artists aren't allowed to do any aftermarket sales because they don't own the art, and Wizards of the Coast don't originally own the art anyway. So say for a traditional Magic the Gathering set, there's a main character, the artist will get paid $1,000 to draw a painting of that main character, and then we'll go on to sell. And I've seen someone like the Liliana artist, Steve Argyle, he sells Liliana altars, he sells Liliana playmats, he sells custom Liliana drawings and things like that for people, and he makes lots of money because he drew Liliana in a way. I think he drew Liliana of the Veil, which everyone liked. But with Spider-Man, they can't enable him to do that because he's not then selling a Magic the Gathering piece of artwork that Wizards have control over. He is selling a Spider-Man unlicensed piece of artwork, and he can get sued by Marvel or Wizards or whoever owns that IP, because he is not included in the joint partnership deal between Hasbro and Marvel. And so that's kind of where we're getting to. So 50% of these Marvel sets are going to have disenfranchised artists who can't make aftermarket revenue. And if the art spend per set, per artist, per item doesn't go up, then there will be a knock-on reduction in costs. But one other part that this brought into attention, which I thought was very interesting that I hadn't considered, art is a huge cost for trading card games. So $1,000 per piece of art, which means if you make a set with 250 cards, $256,000, right? Minimum. You might have to pay more for special, versions or full arts or special characters that you need done to a certain quality. So that's a minimum spend, right? If you make a Lord of the Rings set that has 256 cards in, £1,000 each, it's a lot of money. Wizards aren't against using AI art, right? They've never said they were, as far as I know. And, stuff I've read recently has confirmed that. One of the things that is very interesting to think about for Universes Beyond specifically is that AI art is best when it is trained on a large amount of well-established and well-crafted media. Okay? So, your AI art could not draw Bloomburrow as effectively as it can draw Spider-Man. Okay? Your AI art cannot create Aether Drifting Chandra, right, on a motorbike, as well as it can do a Final Fantasy character. So these new universes like Tarkir, these new settings, I guess. Tarkir is not a new setting, but it is a new, set with art and a story and everything, costs considerable amounts of money. What doesn't cost considerable amounts of money is using AI with good prompt engineering and a solid base of, Marvel art to draw lots of different types of Spider-Man. So the other reason, of course, for Universes Beyond, which I didn't realize, but then I read some posts by this artist and some responses, is because they can use AI art to generate it. That is a key, I think, consideration of the future of Universes Beyond, which is that they don't have to pay as much for art. They can use AI art to generate it because it's on well-established IPs. And that's just something to consider. Whether it plays out that way, we'll find out. But I didn't realize. And then I read this post by this Magic the Gathering artist, and he was like, AI art is one of the main reasons this is happening. And they're going to try and cut the amount of actual artists they employ per set. Because you can pay one artist to touch up, 50 pieces of AI art compared to buying 50 artists worth of work. Will it work? So that's the big question. And the answer to this is maybe, and I know that's a real weak answer and you love more from YouTube content creators, but maybe. In the one sense, this is a sensible pivot for an old company looking for fresh direction, right? You're having stagnation of design ideas. You're having difficulty making new settings that feel compelling. You don't want to pay for the sort of lore and work you have to do to make those settings feel rich, which is a whole other problem. But, you have fresh design direction. You have a whole area of untapped creative potential from existing IPs you can bring in, and that can give you a good competitive product versus the rest of the market where people are competing for eyeballs. It can give you a way in versus Marvel Snap. It can give you a way in versus Hearthstone and other IPs. I mean, imagine if World of Warcraft sold its characters to do a set in Magic the Gathering, and some of those Hearthstone players started playing Magic the Gathering. Also, there is a big push for Arena, and this I think should play quite well in Arena. People who are playing Arena don't spend as long in the game or give the game as much of their brain focus as someone who's playing it on the tabletop. They might not care so much about the different abilities that are playing on the table or the different characters, more just care about what's happening on the board and how it works. And the games are usually pretty fast and the setup time's not involved, and you don't have to build your own deck card by card. So people just might not be as bothered by these characters coming in. In fact, maybe they're just excited by it because you can do special like Universes Beyond formats. You can do special SpongeBob format or Marvel only formats and stuff, and short-term events on Arena that I think would play really well because there'll always be people to play with who'll play that format with you compared to your LGS. Theoretically, it also gives more time for development of original settings. And I mean, the positive upside of all of this would be, Wizards and Hasbro spending more time on their original settings and making them better and making the story in those better and the characters better if they use it, right? If they use it. It's a really big question because they can not do it and probably still make a load of money, so they might not do it. But if they do, it could be a bit of breathing room for those teams to actually go and develop something new and fresh and exciting that isn't just, whatever happened with Phyrexia, where it was like over in a set and a half or something and it felt really weird. I read the story, but it didn't. You can tell here 6 months later after I read it, it did not stick with me at all. Because I think, how did it end? Someone just resurrected someone else by killing themselves and then saved the day in a not very impactful way. But my point is, they could use this time, the breathing room, to develop more. And the line might just go up, right? They might just sell more to more people who want more products because it's, Spider-Man and they love Spider-Man. And that could just make them make a lot of money. And then it will be considered to have worked, even if a lot of the existing player base start to fall away, as long as the player base doesn't fall away completely. So let's talk about why I personally dislike this. And this will be my kind of final takeaway. The first real problem is dilution of setting. So a really big issue that I have now as someone who is a fan of culture, of literature, of reading and fantasy worlds is that companies are not investing the time and the money that they make to create new, rich and compelling stories and settings for me to enjoy, right? They're focused on reusing what's already been done, making quick money, and really not spending the time to do what they're doing well and to justify the environment. So I've got two examples here on the right, Rings of Power and The Rise of Skywalker, two incredibly high-budget films that were ultimately incredibly disappointing. And I'm not saying they're disappointing because I'm a massive Tolkien fan or I was a massive Star Wars fan. They're disappointing just because the writing quality does not exist in either of them, right? Rings of Power has a lot of logical fallacies in terms of the characters changing their own motivations and actions over the entire series. The same with Rise of Skywalker, and the very fact that the apparent plot and the characterization changes 3 times across the span of those trilogies is just a massive failure of process, right? And that's what bothers me. It's not just a failure of quality, it's also a failure of process because they're so caught up in what the customers want and delivering on expectations, they actually deliver shit, basically. And Rings of Power itself as well is just gorgeous shit. It's pretty but bad. And if you're going to invest in an existing universe which has already been done and you do it badly, even though it's well funded, then what are you adding to the world? What are you adding to the creative experience that I, as a fan of your game, of your film, should be taking away? So Magic kind of sees, I wrote here, just feels like another falling domino. It really just feels like we're the next person on the bandwagon to take advantage of an existing IP because we're too lazy to do better and we want your money. And that's just boring for me, right? It's kind of just boring. I want the companies that have the money and make hundreds of millions a year to spend the time, the money, and the effort creating something for the customers to enjoy. And a new Magic set, a new Magic world, a new Magic plane could be the source of new stories for the next 20 years. But are we going to get that? Or are we going to get another Spider-Man card game that I can play? Right? Do you see the dichotomy there? Is we're not just diluting Magic the Gathering, but we're also diluting Spider-Man. And if what's put out is garbage, then what are we getting? Like, Rings of Power didn't add to Lord of the Rings except in visuals. Star Wars Rise of Skywalker added a little bit, I guess, but it also disappointed in many ways. So, where does the actual creativity come from? It doesn't come from AI art. It doesn't come from, reusing existing settings. It comes from taking the time to spend the money to create compelling settings and narratives within your game and within your universe. And Universes Beyond isn't that. It's recycled, existing, tired trash. Even if you like those universes, you have to acknowledge that, SpongeBob isn't going to be better because it's in Magic the Gathering. It was best when it was a cartoon, and everything that's come after that is a way for a company to come for your money and maybe provide you some sort of fun experience. But really, you can have a fun experience playing Magic the Gathering. You don't need it to be SpongeBob to have a fun experience. SpongeBob's a cartoon. It doesn't do SpongeBob better because it's now in Magic the Gathering, right? It doesn't. So, the setting is getting diluted. It's becoming worse. Product fatigue is already a factor. Loads of people have talked about it. I stopped keeping up with Magic the Gathering a couple of years ago. I used to follow the sets, even though I didn't play that often, just to see what was happening. If there were interesting cards, if there was a reason to jump back onto Arena, play some Standard or do some drafting. I don't do that anymore. There's too many products. I can't be bothered. Occasionally I see something view the TCG media, which I'm plugged into, obviously, as a content creator. And I think, okay, I'll go draft Bloomburrow if I have the time, and then I don't have the time. My commander decks have been frozen in amber since 5 years ago, and I've also sold most of them. I have 3 precons and 1 constructed deck left. So I do still play Commander every now and then, but I'm not actively consuming Magic the Gathering, right? They've lost me because of their rate of product fatigue. And I do think that for other people as well, I think the addition of new worlds and themes makes keeping up a bit more tiring, because it's not just, oh, this is the next Kaladesh set, I already know everything about what's happening there. It's the, oh, what universes beyond am I in now? What crazy mechanic have they added to properly capture SpongeBob? Like, come on, stickers, right? I mean, I don't need to say anything more than that. Who made those standard legal or modern legal or whatever they're legal in? It's ridiculous. And I think that the biggest thing I think I dislike as well is game coherence and feeling. I feel like, and I kind of said this earlier in the video, that for me, the onboard story of, okay, you know, my Krosa or my Garruk is going to attack your, you, and you're going to block with Prosper and stuff like that matters, right? And D&D helped. D&D was fine in that respect, and Lord of the Rings was kind of fine in that respect. But to me, there is a board readability and comfort, and it's not just because I'm old. It is because I'm, on the neurospicy, and lots of people are, and we like things to be in certain buckets, right? And for me, board readability and comfort comes from the shared feeling of universe. And if I want to play Star Wars, I'll go and play Star Wars Unlimited. Or if I want to play Lord of the Rings, I'll go and play Lord of the Rings TCG, LCG, or I'll play the Lord of the Rings TCG, which I have a load of upstairs. And there's a certain amount that, Lord of the Rings coming in didn't jar me, but something like SpongeBob or My Little Pony or whatever they go to next will. And I think that readability is an important feeling. And obviously, Wizards don't agree, but tell me what you think in the comments. So there we go. Thanks for watching. Do remember to like and subscribe. I will have a playlist. This is which has all of my Magic the Gathering related content. Not that there will be much, but there might be occasional videos every now and then. But otherwise, subscribe for typical TCG industry discussions and FAB related discussions, and I might even cover a few other card games like Altered, Lord of the Rings, which is dead but still kind of cool, and Sorcery, all of which I have on the shelves behind me. So thanks for listening, and obviously I want to hear your thoughts about this. That is what the comment section is for, so do let me know. Are you excited by Universes Beyond? Do you think it's a steaming trash heap on fire and just waiting to kill Magic the Gathering? You know the answer, I don't. Let me know what you're thinking.